Was Jimmy really going to kill Karen in Goodfellas? You know what makes that scene so terrifying? It is not the alley. It is not the men in the shadows. It is not even Jimmy standing there on the sidewalk smiling like everything is perfectly normal. What makes that scene terrifying is that for a few seconds, everything still looks ordinary. It is daytime, people are out, cars are passing, nobody is running, nobody is yelling, nobody pulls a gun. And yet the second Karen starts walking, you feel it. You feel that something is wrong. Not maybe wrong, not possibly wrong. Deep in your gut, this is the kind of wrong that people do not come back from. That is why this moment has stayed with people for so long. Fans have been arguing about it for decades. Was Jimmy really going to kill Karen? Was she walking into a setup? Or was she just scared, strung out, paranoid, and reading danger into something innocent? Maybe the dresses were really around the corner. Maybe Jimmy was genuinely trying to help. Maybe the whole thing only feels sinister because we already know what kind of world these people live in. Yeah, maybe. And maybe a guy like Jimmy Conway sends a mob wife down a deserted alley in Brooklyn in broad daylight because he suddenly got interested in fashion. Come on. That is the beauty of Goodfellas. The movie never says it outright. It never gives you the neat answer. It just puts you in Karen's shoes and lets the dread do the work. But when you really look at the story, and when you really think about what Jimmy had already become by that point, the scene stops feeling ambiguous and starts feeling like a warning. Because by the time Karen walks into that moment, Jimmy is not some charming family friend anymore. He is not just the funny guy at the table, the generous guy with a smile, the guy who always seems to know a place, a person, a score, a way out. By then, Jimmy is a man surrounded by pressure, hunted by the FBI, and used to solving problems one way, quietly, permanently, efficiently. And that changes everything. To understand why that alley matters, you have to go back before Karen, before the fear, before the near miss. You have to go back to the Lufthansa robbery, because that is the moment where Jimmy stops being merely dangerous and becomes the kind of man who looks at everyone around him and starts seeing numbers instead of people, costs instead of friendships, risks instead of loyalties. That job, the Lufthansa heist, was not just a huge score. It was the beginning of the end. For a little while, it looked like perfection. A vault, almost $6 million in cash, one of the biggest robberies in American history at the time. No alarms, no wild shootout, no dramatic chase. Just a clean operation, fast and precise, the kind of job that makes legends. For a moment, Jimmy must have felt untouchable, the smartest guy in the room, the guy who beat the system. The guy who took that kind of money and walked away breathing. But jobs like that do not end when the money leaves the vault. That is where civilians always get it wrong. They think the robbery is the hard part. It is not. The hard part is what comes after. The hard part is the crew, the loose mouths, the guys who start getting nervous, the guys who want more than their share, the guys who cannot shut up, the guys who know one thing too many. Once there is that much money on the table, everybody becomes a problem. Everybody becomes a risk. And for Jimmy, once you become a risk, you are not really a friend anymore. That is the arithmetic Henry Hill later describes so coldly. It was easier to put a bullet in somebody's head than to hand them a few $100,000. Think about that line for a second. That is not rage talking. That is not revenge. That is calculation. That is a man sitting down with the facts and deciding that murder is cleaner than generosity. It tells you everything you need to know about how Jimmy's mind worked. And once he started thinking that way, people around him began disappearing, not metaphorically, literally disappearing. One guy gets killed because he parks the getaway van in the wrong place. Another guy vanishes after expecting his cut. Another one is found shot. Another one never comes back. One by one, the people connected to Lufthansa start dropping out of the picture until the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Jimmy is cleaning up, tying off loose ends, cutting away liabilities. Anybody who could expose him, embarrass him, threaten him, or cost him money is suddenly living on borrowed time. That is the man Karen is dealing with in that alley scene. And that is why the question matters so much, because Karen is not walking towards some random danger. She is walking toward a man who already has a history of eliminating people when the pressure gets too high. Now, Karen herself is often misunderstood, and that is part of what makes the scene even better. A lot of people watch Goodfellas and think of her as the outsider, the wife, the woman who married into the life and got swept along by the glamour until it turned ugly. That is too simple. Karen is not naive by that point, not even close. She has lived with Henry for years. She has seen the violence, the money, the drugs, the fear, the sudden mood swings, the weird silences, the coded conversations, the smiling threats. She has carried contraband. She has protected the household. She has destroyed evidence. She has survived by learning how to read men like Jimmy Burke before they say the thing they really mean. So when people say she was just paranoid, I do not buy it. Not for 1 second. There is a difference between panic and recognition. And what Karen has in that scene is recognition. She knows the tone. She knows the smile. She knows the kind of fake casualness dangerous men use when they do not want you to feel the knife before it goes in. Jimmy is too calm, too friendly, too patient. He is not behaving like a man offering help. He is behaving like a man guiding somebody toward a decision that has already been made. And the setup itself is ridiculous if you think about it for more than 5 seconds. Christian Dior dresses around the corner in a quiet alley. The whole thing has that thin, improvised quality that makes it even creepier, because it sounds like something put together quickly by a man who needs to act now. A good lie usually comes with details that make you relax. This one comes with details that make you walk faster into your own grave. Keep going. Right there. Just a little farther. It is the kind of instruction that sounds harmless unless you understand who is giving it. Then Scorsese does something brilliant. He does not cut to an omniscient perspective. He does not show you what is really waiting. He traps you with Karen. The alley tightens. The sound shifts. The storefront darkens. 2 figures move inside, and they do not look like men getting ready to show off dresses. They look like men waiting for an arrival, waiting for someone to come just a few steps closer, waiting for the door to shut behind the moment. That is when Karen stops. And that stop is everything. Because in a movie full of people ignoring their instincts, talking themselves into danger, accepting one more drink, one more score, one more favor, one more meeting, Karen does something almost nobody else in this world does. She listens to the voice that tells her to leave. She does not over-explain it. She does not worry about seeming rude. She does not think, let me just check. She turns around, gets back in the car, and drives away. That decision feels small when you watch it the first time, but it may be the smartest decision anyone makes in the entire film. Now, did Jimmy mean to kill her? Right there, that is where people get hung up. And I think they get hung up because they are asking the question too narrowly. When people hear kill, they imagine one clean plan, one exact move, one final certainty. But men like Jimmy do not always think in those terms. They think in terms of control. If killing you is the cleanest way to control a problem, that is what they do. If threatening you works better, they do that. If kidnapping you gives them leverage over someone else, they do that. The point is not the method. The point is whether you are useful alive or easier dead. And by that stage, Karen and Henry are both becoming liabilities. Henry is already in deep trouble. The drugs, the investigations, the arrests, the heat from law enforcement, all of it is closing in. Jimmy starts asking questions. And that is one of the biggest warning signs in the whole story. He is not asking how Henry is doing because he cares. He is not checking in because he is worried about the family. He wants to know what Henry has said, what he might say, what the investigators know, how bad the danger is, how close the spotlight is getting. Those are not friendly questions. Those are inventory questions. He is taking stock of the problem. Karen tells him she does not know anything. Maybe that is true. Maybe that is the most important lie she ever told. Either way, it is not enough for Jimmy. Because when a man like that starts to suspect he is losing control, he reaches for whatever tool is available. And Karen, in that moment, is not just Henry's wife. She is access. She is pressure. She is leverage. She is the thing you grab when you want another man to fall in line. That is why I think the alley is more chilling than a simple murder setup. If he planned to kill her immediately, it is monstrous, yes, but it is also simple. The darker possibility is that he planned to use her first, take her, scare her, hold her, force Henry into a corner, and then decide what to do with both of them once the pieces are in place. That kind of thinking fits Jimmy even better. It is colder, more strategic, more patient. It turns Karen from a target into an instrument, and that is exactly how a man like Jimmy sees people by that point in his life. Still, whether it was kidnapping first or killing first, the essential truth does not change. She was not being invited to something harmless. She was being maneuvered into a situation where she would lose control, and once she lost control, Jimmy would decide what happened next. And what makes it all even more fascinating is that the plan is sloppy compared with the way Jimmy usually operates. This is not a polished operation. This is not the clean precision of Lufthansa or the carefully managed disappearances that followed. This feels more improvised, more desperate, more exposed. The men in the storefront are visible. Karen has space to hesitate. Jimmy is standing in sight. The whole thing depends on her not trusting herself. That is a weak point. And Jimmy is not usually a weak point kind of guy. Why? Pressure. That is the answer that makes the most sense to me. By then, the world is closing in on him from every direction. The FBI is watching. Associates are being questioned. The old safety nets are disappearing. Henry is unstable. Karen is alert. The room to operate is shrinking, and when a guy who is used to controlling every variable starts improvising under pressure, mistakes creep in. He still thinks he is the smartest guy in the room, but now he is moving faster than the situation allows. He is forcing things, and forced plans fail. Karen driving away is one of those failures. The moment she leaves, the illusion breaks. The friendly favor does not work. The old trust is gone. She goes back to Henry, and suddenly the pattern becomes undeniable. Because Karen has the alley, and Henry has the Florida trip. Another little errand, another innocent-sounding request, another setup disguised as an opportunity. By then, Henry knows exactly what those errands mean. He knows what happened to the people Jimmy sent off before. He knows how these stories end. So when Karen tells him what happened, the two of them finally see the full picture. They are not part of the family anymore. They are part of the cleanup. And once Henry understands that, the ending becomes inevitable. He can deal with prison. He can deal with humiliation. He can deal with losing the money, the status, the life he thought he had. But he cannot deal with Jimmy when Jimmy has reached the point where even Karen and the kids are no longer off limits. That changes the math. It turns cooperation from betrayal into survival. That is the real significance of the alley scene. It is not just a moment of suspense. It is the moment the code dies. Whatever loyalty Henry still imagined existed, whatever old friendship still seemed real, whatever family language these men used for years, it all collapses in that one quiet afternoon. Because if Jimmy is willing to make a move on Karen, then there is nothing left to misunderstand. No more maybe, no more benefit of the doubt, no more pretending that the old ties still mean something. It is over. And that is exactly what happens. Henry gets arrested, the pressure peaks, he knows prison is waiting, and he knows Jimmy is waiting too, which may be worse. So he flips, he talks, he becomes a government witness. The whole structure starts coming down piece by piece. Men go to prison. Names become evidence. Stories become testimony. Jimmy, who once looked untouchable, ends up behind bars anyway. Not for the crimes that made him infamous, but for the strange, crooked path that finally caught up with him. And Karen, the woman who trusted her instincts in that alley, disappears into witness protection and vanishes from public life so completely that she becomes almost ghost-like in the story, which is somehow the perfect ending for that scene, because that alley is about disappearance, about the thin line between returning to your car and never being seen again, about how an ordinary afternoon can turn into the last wrong turn of your life if you ignore the feeling in your chest telling you something is off. So, was Jimmy really going to kill Karen? Maybe not in the simplest, most immediate sense people imagine. Maybe the first move was meant to be kidnapping, control, leverage, pressure. Maybe he had not decided the final step yet. But honestly, once you see the kind of trap she was walking into, that distinction starts to feel academic. In Jimmy's world, being taken by him when you have become a liability is just death with extra steps. Whether Karen was meant to die that hour, that night, or after she had served her purpose, the alley leads to the same place. That is why the scene hits so hard. It is not about one question with one clean answer. It is about realizing that Karen understood the ending before it arrived. She saw the shape of it. She felt the trap closing. And unlike almost everybody else in Goodfellas, she did the one thing that saved her. She stopped walking.